The Theology, Medicine, and Culture Initiative at Duke Divinity School, in partnership with the Christian Medical and Dental Associations, welcomes you to our lecture series entitled Jesus and Medicine. What does Christianity have to offer healthcare?
Once upon a time, there was a young woman in the middle of her sophomore year at college, thinking about what she wants to be when she grows up. She thought about law, about finance, about teaching, but something appealed to her about medicine. Maybe it was having lived with a family member who suffered from chronic illness, or maybe it was that physician she knew, whose work she admired. Maybe it was just the challenge, the intellectual demands, and the long training. She says to herself, I think I have what it takes to become a physician. I want to do this. And let's suppose this young woman is a Christian. She not only thinks I'm capable of this, I want this, but I believe I'm called to this. She senses that medicine is work that can be fitted into a Christian's vocation to love God and love one's neighbor. So this young woman entered on the long road to becoming a physician, the road on which each of you has embarked. Along the way, she found that there were costs, long hours of study, large amounts of money to borrow. But there were also rewards, the delight of learning so much about the human body, the deep satisfaction in connecting with patients, in attending to those who are sick and using one's best efforts to seek their healing. And then along the way, something happened. Now this young woman is a few years out of residency, practicing in Middle America, maybe in your own medical center. And she now says, if I had it to do over again, I would not choose to become a physician. In the next few years, I hope to reduce the amount of time I spend in direct patient care. What happened? What happened? You may resonate already with this young woman's experience. Half of U.S. physicians meet criteria for burnout, as do half of medical students by the end of their third year. And Christina Maslach, the most prominent researcher of burnout, writes, burnout is a prolonged response to chronic emotional and interpersonal stressors on the job and is defined by the three dimensions of exhaustion, cynicism, and inefficacy. Burnout is an epidemic problem in medicine. So how should we, as Christians, make sense of this problem? How should we respond? The typical response to burnout within academic medical centers is to see it as a consequence of inadequate self-care and work-life balance. Now, there are two problems with this. First, it doesn't fit the story I just told, and countless other stories like it. It's just not the case that this young physician at some point stopped caring for herself, nor that she allowed her time at work to crowd out other things she valued in her life. Rather, what happened is that over time, her work has come to seem less and less morally significant or worthwhile. Medicine was always a lot of work, always costly, always much ado. But increasingly, it came to seem like much ado about not much. She experienced herself expending a lot of effort, running in circles or following directives that she wasn't sure she even agreed with. What this physician was experiencing was a loss of morale. The practice of medicine just didn't seem as meaningful or worthwhile as it had seemed back when she thought she was called to be a physician. And as a Christian, this malaise takes on an explicitly spiritual and theological character. She finds herself asking, what does any of this have to do with what I thought God was calling me to be and to do as a physician? So construing burnout as a problem of inadequate self-care and work-life balance just doesn't fit the experience of many physicians. The second problem is that this construal pits the practice of medicine against life, as if the work of medicine is a disease or burden for which those afflicted by it need care. It suggests that if work goes up, life goes down. The more you give of yourself to work, the less you have left for life. Now, if that's true, who wants to continue practicing medicine? Well, be encouraged. It's not true. Medicine, rightly understood and rightly practiced, is a rich way of living a life. It is intrinsically rewarding and has long been recognized by the church as a special way of putting into practice the church's call to love our neighbors. Why then do so many medical students and physicians feel demoralized about their work? There are at least three interrelated dynamics that contribute to this medical malaise. The first is the rise of industry and bureaucracy. In a book called The Homeless Mind, the famed sociologist Peter Berger and his colleagues identified the two dominant features of modernization: technological production and bureaucracy. Technological production fits the domain of industry, and bureaucracy fits the domain of the modern state. But, Berger argues, these two features are so ubiquitous in modern life that they shape the way we think and live in domains where they really don't belong, including the church, and that's a subject of another discussion, and including the practice of medicine. So, for example, our work in healthcare is structured increasingly by the industrial norms of continuous quality assessment, improvement, and control. We come to experience medicine as management and physicians as interchangeable cogs in a vast industrial machine. The second dynamic is what another famous sociologist, Max Weber, described as the disenchantment of the world. C.S. Lewis also emphasizes the theme of disenchantment in both his essays and in his fiction. Our modern world, Weber and Lewis show us, is one in which we are trained to assume that everything we experience can, at root, be explained in scientific, rationalistic terms. Nothing, in the end, is greater than the sum of its parts. With respect to the work of medicine, disenchantment makes patients into widgets and clinicians into cogs in the healthcare machine. We come to see the means of our work as separable from its ends. So just as a welder on an assembly line can be a good welder, whether he is contributing to an MRI machine or to a missile, so we physicians increasingly come to understand good medicine as just doing our jobs, efficiently, effectively, and without respect to the purpose of medicine. Over time, Berger notes, this habit leads to a double consciousness. We live in two worlds with two selves: a professional self that's trained to be an efficient, reproducible, bureaucratic functionary, the self that tries to make sure one's Christian commitments do not get in the way of standard scientific medical care, and a personal self that tries to sustain meaning in one's private world, perhaps through cultivating a devotional life and studying the Bible with other Christian medical students. This habit also leads to what Berger called moralized anonymity. Anonymity in the sense that we learn to check our so-called personal values at the exam room door. Moralized in the sense that we come to think that that is right and proper for us to do, to keep our personal values from interfering with our professional obligations, to keep the medical industry working efficiently, to make sure patients get what they want, and so on. No wonder then that what were once called healers, clinicians, practitioners have now become mere providers of healthcare services. The third dynamic that contributes to this loss of morale among physicians is the decline of moral agency. The Christian philosopher Charles Taylor says that a defining feature of modern life is learned helplessness. We look around at Epic and Medicare and Step 1 and hospital administration and all of the other massive and complex systems and bureaucratic structures governing our work, and we think that even if we wanted to change something, our best efforts would accomplish little. We're not going to get anywhere. So we just put our heads down and trudge ahead. But something crucial gets lost. Demoralization leads to detachment. For that young physician whom I described, the work to which she believed she had been called by God becomes merely a job to tolerate. She lets go of her longing to be a good and faithful physician and settles for the desire to pay her bills without further compromising herself. In their book, Habits of the Heart, Robert Bellah and colleagues contrasted work done as a calling with work done as a job. Insofar as the practice of medicine is experienced as a job, the practice is valued instrumentally for benefits it provides, such as income, that have nothing intrinsically to do with medicine. If a physician can obtain such benefits in a different, less burdensome way, he or she will. In contrast, insofar as the practice of medicine is experienced as a calling or as internal to one's calling, then the physician works for the fulfillment that comes from the work itself, its internal or intrinsic rewards. Insofar as physicians are called to medicine, they will practice medicine for its own sake. Today, religious and secular people alike will describe their work as a calling. But the word calling, or vocation, the same word, transliterated from the Latin, has origins in Christianity, meaning that pattern of life to which a person is called by God. In our story, the young physician's work stopped making sense to her as aligning in any special way with her calling as a Christian. It became just a job, but it was worse than that, because this physician had long sensed that it is wrong to practice medicine as if it is merely a job, as if patients are files or cases or widgets, as if the doctor is one part in an assembly line of technological production. So she feels caught. She struggles to see how she can go on as a physician with integrity. If burnout is a problem of demoralization in the practice of medicine, of a kind of spiritual deflation or flattening of this work, then the challenge for our physician is not to engage in more self-care or find more work-life balance. Rather, the challenge is to recover a vision for why the practice of medicine is intrinsically worthwhile, why it is good. And the corollary challenge for her, for me, for you, is to find ways of doing our work that are truer to what we know we have been called to do as physicians. Now that means, at the least, that we must reject all efforts to treat medicine as merely the technically competent provision of healthcare services to those authorized to request them. We must resist the idea of separating the professional from the personal, the ethical from the religious, professional standards and norms from good and faithful practices of medicine. If medicine is not good work for Christians, then Christians at least have reason to leave the practice of medicine. But the truth is that medicine is good work for Christians. And the church has long honored the work of caring for the sick as central to its vocation to practice hospitality toward those who are poor and suffering, and to bear witness to God's healing and redeeming work in Christ. By grounding ourselves in these truths, we rediscover the nature and purposes of medicine, and we gain eyes to see pathways by which we can go on, not as burned-out providers of services, but as faithful and joyful practitioners of these healing arts.
For reflection questions and other resources, visit tmc.divinity.duke.edu/JesusandMedicine.